You know what Ed Gein thinks? No, the serial killer from Wisconsin. He thinks two things when I see a pretty girl. Part of me wants to take her out, have a good time, be real sweet and kind to her. What's the other thing? What her head would look like on a stick. Thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. This week we are taking a look back at a modern classic, and that is American Psycho. Released in the year 2000, based on the novel by Bret Easton Ellis, directed by Mary Harron, and starring Christian Bale in the title role of serial killer Patrick Bateman. Also starring Reese Witherspoon, Jared Leto, Josh Lucas, and Willem Dafoe as Detective Donald Kimball. Just an absolute classic. It didn't make a huge wave at the box office. It did okay. It did receive some good praise, especially about Christian Bale's performance as Patrick Bateman, and also the screenplay. The screenplay, I think, is just brilliant. It's filled chock full of great one-liners, and just the dialogue is so memorable and so quotable. You just have an endless great time remembering all the excellent lines in the film, you know. That's what's so memorable about it. There's probably as many great lines as, say, like The Breakfast Club or something like that. So yeah, it was released in the year 2000, and it's definitely a black comedy slash horror film. Much in the way of, like, say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, you know how that was a real demented black comedy, the blackest of black comedy. Not to say this movie is like that at all, it's much more sophisticated. But it has that same kind of feel as far as the humor in the film. It's really dark and sick and twisted. So we meet Patrick Bateman, who is a corporate tycoon who works for Wall Street and for a company called Pierce and Pierce. And he's a big shot CEO type, extremely well dressed, extremely good looking. He's absolutely obsessed with a lot of things, but one of them being physical fitness and his image, the way he looks. He's obsessed with health and beauty products, with his hair, you know. And he mentions how he uses all these different lotions. It's hilarious when he's in the shower. You see him use all these different shampoos, and then when he goes to shave, he's got all kinds of aftershaves and body lotions and shaving cream. Must take him like 2 hours to get ready to go to work. And then he does a vigorous workout routine while he's watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I love the line towards the beginning when he says, "There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, an entity. He may be able to hide his cold gaze, but you may see the facade. You may be able to think you can shake my hand and our lives may be comparable. But at the end of the day, I am just not there." So that's a great insight into the character of Patrick Bateman. Because he's not there. There's nothing there but a black hole, a black heart, if you will. There's nothing but hate and disdain for the human race, for humanity in general. And part of me thinks that maybe at some point Patrick Bateman was a good guy. He was probably real driven and determined for success, and worked real hard at it to get where he is. But at some point along the way, he got misguided. He got completely lost in the greed and the money, in the power, and just the obsession of being able to do whatever the hell you want to do. And he feels entitled. He feels like he can just do anything he wants and there'll be no consequences whatsoever. And that's literally all he cares about at this point. He doesn't care about anybody but himself and the greed and the money and just being able to do as much as he wants, do as much drugs as he wants, abuse women as objects, use them. As he says at one point, I like to dissect girls. Do you know I'm utterly insane? He'll say these psychotic things under his breath, and people just laugh it off, or they don't really pay him any attention. But he's saying these really dark, sadistic things. Like he goes to the bar towards the beginning, and he goes to order a drink, and he tries to use like a coupon, and the bartender's like, we don't take this anymore. It's $25. And then when she turns her head around, it's like, you're a fucking ugly bitch. I'm gonna stab you to death and play with your blood. And then she just turns around, not noticing or paying any attention. A lot of things like that happen in this movie. Nobody seems to take him serious or pay any attention to him. He's just like this corporate drone, like almost like a robot, indistinguishable from the rest of them, with the fancy suits and the fancy shoes and shirt and tie and the same slick back hairdo and expensive glasses and as everyone else in the company. And it's funny because a lot of the people that he works with, some of the people he's friends with, don't even know his actual name. They confuse him with some other guy. You know. It's hilarious though. As you'll see throughout the movie, Patrick Bateman has several obsessions, one of them being music. He talks to some of his victims before he kills them. Like a couple different prostitutes he preys on. You'll see him chatting around, and before he kills them, he talks about music. So he's really obsessed with music, obsessed with like pop music, like Phil Collins. He talks about in depth. He talks about, Phil Collins really came into his own on the Invisible Touch album. It had several #1 hit singles, and he really talks in depth about Phil Collins and Huey Lewis and the News. He starts talking about hit to be square, and he starts dancing around. He's like, I really think the band came into their own on the Sports album. He just starts talking real in depth about pop music. And then I start to think about, I was actually starting to relate to this guy because I have a couple of sessions myself about music and movies. I'm kind of like that when it comes to those things, I could sit there and talk about Slayer and Metallica and Megadeth for hours and talk about the albums and the guitarists and the drummer and the, I'm like, this is pretty weird. I'm like starting to look at myself and think about these things of like, what's wrong with me? Because this is scary. I'm relating to this serial killer, this insane psychopath. But it's just funny, So Patrick Bateman has this girlfriend played by Reese Witherspoon. Her name is Evelyn. And he just really doesn't give a damn about her. It's like she's just there to make him look good because she's real pretty, and he wants to look good, and he wants to fit in, like he says at one point in the film. I just want to fit in. When she starts talking about, I want to get married, and he's like, no, I can't take the time off work. But he says, I just want to fit in. So you really get some insight to the type of person he is, that he's just shallow. There's nothing to him but trying to fit in, trying to look good, and putting on this facade. But meanwhile, on the inside, it's just a black hole, like I said. So he hangs out with these other business tycoons, and there's one hilarious scene when they're all looking at each other's business cards, and there's another obsession that they have, their business cards. That's how crazy these people are. They're worried about raised lettering and the type, the font that's used on the business card. Is sitting there talking about it, getting off on it. And then they're like, let's take a look at Paul Allen's card. And it's all dramatic. They got it in this one of those indestructible cases. He pulls out the card, and it's like a dramatic scene. And they pull out Paul Allen's card, and he starts to sweat. He's like, oh my god, look at the subtle off-white lettering. Look at the pale nimbus type font. Oh my god. And he's like, oh my god, it even has a watermark. It's just so funny that the whole movie is all about obsessions and obsessive behavior. At one point they're all like, they do nothing but bad things. They do drugs, they booze, they stay out all night, and they get prostitutes. And at one point, him and his buddies are at this nightclub. This takes place back in the 80s, by the way. You hear all the classic 80s music, you know. And they're talking in a nightclub, and they're with a couple of models. And this just shows you how shallow he is. And the girl asks him, you think I'm stupid, don't you? You think models are stupid? He's like, that's okay. There's something really sweet about you. I was like, lady, you have no idea. She also says, she also asks Patrick, what do you do? And he's like, well, murders and executions mostly. And then the model's like, oh, really? Do you like it? He's like, well, it depends. And she's like, well, most of my friends that work in mergers and acquisitions don't like it either. Again, it's just like they don't hear what he's saying. They don't pay attention to the absolute lunatic that he is, no matter how many signs he gives. And it becomes surreal at some points, you know. He's so like invisible to society because he's just this corporate Joan, this yuppie type guy, that nobody notices him. He's just a typical white dude, suited up type businessman, and nobody really notices him. And that's part of the issue that he has. No matter what he does, he gets off. He wants to get caught. You even see him dragging a body bag through the hotel lobby, and there's a whole blood trail all down the hallway, and nobody pays any attention. And he's just right in front of the hotel. He puts the body in the trunk, and nobody says anything. And at one point, he's just in the middle of the street, running around the street, blasting people in the face with a gun. He shoots the clerk at the hotel. He just shoots random people on the street. The cops come to get him, and he shoots them right between the eye, each one. And then the cars blow up like a Die Hard movie, and he looks at his gun. He's like, what? It's like, no matter what he does, he's just going to get away with it. No matter how many women he kills, and he kills a lot of people in the movie. There's a couple of prostitutes he murders, and one of them at one point looks like she's going to get away. She goes to get away from Patrick Bateman, and she's like making all kinds of noise, screaming, running through the hallways, knocking on all the neighbors' doors in the apartment, and nobody does anything. Nobody comes to check on her. And he runs around the hall buck naked with a chainsaw chasing her, caped in blood. And so the girl runs down the stairs, and it's this huge spiral staircase, and he just drops the chainsaw, and bam, it goes right in her back, killing her instantly. And you see at the bottom of the stairs a pool of blood, and it's right directly in her back. And he just has this crazy look on him. He's like, ah, you know, at the top. It's like nobody pays any attention to him. It's hilarious. It's like I said, it's a real black comedy, but it's brilliant. and it really actually makes you think. There's a message behind it. It's a real grim look at society in general and how, like, indistinguishable these rich corporate tycoons can be, you know, and that it's just a real dark look at society in general. But I just think it's brilliant. It's so well written. It's so well directed. All the acting performances are excellent, especially Patrick Bateman, played by Christian Bale, who's an A-lister right now. You know, he's won Oscars. You know, he's had so many great roles, but this is my favorite role of Christian Bale. I have to say, I just think he just has such a brilliant performance, and he's hilarious. He's sadistic. He's psychotic. And he's just brilliant. So, at any cost, run and grab American Psycho. If you haven't seen this film, you absolutely have to see it because it's brilliant. It's one of my favorite horror films of the 2000s. So run and get American Psycho. I give it 2 devil horns up. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.